Hours ago, he was scheduled to go. His coffee was still unopened, the suitcase was still by the door, and his watch's edge was shining in the sunlight. My friend stayed, but my husband had already departed for work. It was okay, I reminded myself. Perhaps he was waiting for a ride, another cup, or some other reason to stay that had nothing to do with me. But I could see we were both acting as he slowly and steadily looked up. The morning was too peaceful, and the home was too silent. It felt less like he hadn't left yet, and more like he wasn't planning to when he smiled, that same cautious, knowing smile from the previous evening. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to this video before I explain how it began and how one night became a question I have yet to answer. It keeps you here for the next one and is more beneficial than you might imagine. Let me now explain how he ultimately decided to stay. He was unexpected, unannounced, and somehow anticipated to arrive on a Thursday. My spouse had previously brought up the college pal who had been in and out. My husband didn't think twice when he called that afternoon to ask if he might stay for 1 or 2 nights. They were already giggling in the kitchen when I got home from work. Old tales, partially consumed alcohol, and the effortless coziness that results from a common past. I convinced myself that I was merely a part of the backdrop while grinning, listening, and pouring myself a drink. He was quieter and sharper around the eyes than I had imagined. He exuded an air of someone who was more perceptive than he claimed. He appeared to be observing something each time I looked up, just in a way that recalled, without requesting consent. The dinner lasted longer than anticipated. My spouse discussed past errors and promotions. His companion is filling in the blanks with that serene, humorous tone that people employ after seeing someone too much. I once noticed him looking at me while my spouse was talking. It just flickered long enough for me to imagine it, yet it stuck in my head. Later, I cleared the table as they made their way to the living room. Their quiet, recognizable, almost sentimental laughing reverberated down the corridor. I spent more time than was necessary staring at the dishes, half listening, half thinking. By the time I joined them, the conversation had changed, with words being replaced by the constant hum of a house and anecdotes giving way to stillness. My spouse reclined, his eyes heavy with the kind of weariness that accompanies comfort. I glanced back at the friend. Nothing was uttered, just a quick glance. However, I sensed a change in that one instant, something little, imperceptible, and fully alive. I became aware that I didn't want the evening to finish just yet, as my spouse fell asleep in the middle of a statement. The house felt larger and calmer when my spouse eventually went upstairs. As I began cleaning up, I could still hear his footsteps for a bit, followed by the faint sound of the bedroom door closing, and then just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clink of plates. Naturally, he offered to assist. He stayed, even though I told him he didn't have to. Like he had done it 100 times before, he rolled up his sleeves, gathered the glasses, and stood next to me at the sink. We were silent for a time. Just the sound of running water, the scent of wine and soap, and the quiet that amplifies the little things. Maybe twice, his hand touched mine. I didn't move away, and neither did he. When he eventually said, "You two haven't changed much," he spoke in a low voice that was nearly indistinguishable from the sound of the faucet. I was not sure why, but I grinned. Is that good or bad? He gave me a quick look. Just enough time, not too long, depending on what you wish to alter. I didn't respond. The steam rising between us was caught by the flickering light above the sink. After drying one plate, he put it aside and then another. He seemed to be giving me time to stop him with each careful, controlled movement. The room immediately became silent as soon as I shut off the water. He had gotten closer. I could feel the warmth emanating from his arm without ever touching it. I finally broke the silence by saying, "Thank you for helping." He grinned. After the supper, it was the least I could do, yet his voice lacked appreciation. It had the sound of a pledge. As I picked up the remaining silverware, I pretended not to notice how his eyes followed me steadily and calmly, as if he already knew I wouldn't ask him to go. The home creaked upstairs. In his sleep, my hubby turned in. Neither of us moved down here. The sound of the front door closing awakened me up. My husband had already left. Early commutes, meetings, and a fleeting kiss on my forehead that hardly registered. An empty mug beside the sink was the only indication that he had been there by the time I got downstairs. The visitor was still dozing off on the sofa. One arm was laying over his eyes, the blanket had slipped partly off, and he was sleeping deeply and peacefully, a state that only occurs when someone feels at ease in an unsuitable place. I observed the silent rise and fall of his respiration for a longer period of time than I intended to. After that, I started the coffee and turned away. The morning light had already spread over the room when he eventually woke up. He gently sat up, his eyes adjusting and his hair a little dishevelled. "Didn't mean to sleep in," he murmured in a sleep-roughened voice. I said, "It's fine," too hastily. "You can stay as long as you need." He gave me a knowing smile, which made me question if he had been waiting for me to say it. I placed a coffee cup in front of him. That same silent echo from the previous evening was heard as our fingertips touched once more. He took a while to move his hand. I didn't either. He glanced around the room before turning back to face me. He stated that he will be absent all day. I pretended to examine my phone while I nodded, until late, most likely. Leaning back, he observed me through the rim of his cup. "Then it's just us, I suppose." The air felt thicker because of the way he spoke, which was effortless and almost casual. Even though there was plenty of brightness in the house, it seemed like the darkness was still clinging to us. I felt his eyes on every little movement as I turned aside to pour another cup. And he was no longer acting as I turned to look behind me. At first, he remained silent and watched me from the other side of the room as his coffee cooled in his hand. I tried to pretend that the morning was still routine and that this was just a friendly encounter while I stood by the sink, but our relationship had changed. I could sense it in the way he leaned against the counter, waiting pressure-free and silent. Just to pass the time, I poured another cup that I didn't want to. Before I could catch it, the cup slanted a little as my fingers made an incorrect contact with the handle. He took a step forward. To stabilize it, his hand gently curled around mine. He stayed put despite the gentle, silent, and warm touch. I raised my head. He was closer than I had thought, close enough to smell my husband's faint fragrance, which was still stuck to the guest towel he must have used that morning. I could hear the clock ticking from the hallway since the house was so silent. He assumed I was giving him permission when I didn't retreat. He approached carefully, giving me every opportunity to reconsider. While the other hand rose to tuck a loose hair behind my ear, the first hand brushed against my waist. I didn't stop him, though. I felt the weight of his breath against mine as I leaned toward him, chest to chest. He anchored me by placing his hands at the small of my back. My own fingers traced the edge of his jaw and the slope of his neck as they moved up his shoulder. His mouth lingered just over my flesh, waiting without making contact or inquiring. He understood when I cocked my head in his direction. He gave me a kiss, as if he had been dreaming about it all night. Not harsh or hurried, just deep enough to drown out all other sounds. We walked about the house as if it were our own. Every area around us, including the living room and the hallway, grew longer and more hazy. Never letting me go too far, he gently pushed me back against the wall before pulling me forward once more. He eventually dropped to his knees, not out of ritual, but rather out of conviction. He grounded me and drew me in as his hands moved slowly up the backs of my legs. One careful, reciprocal, unsaid motion at a time, I followed him down. We remained in that position, kneeling on the plush rug, bodies tucked into one another, catching our breath and running through the silence. I could feel his fingers brushing down the side of my thigh, his hands moving around my waist, and his lips at the collarbone's edge. Every movement was deliberate, slow, and neither playful nor cautious. He walked as though he had endless time, and I gave him permission. The only sounds we could hear were flesh on skin, fabric shifting, and the floor creaking gently beneath us. With my fingers entangled in his shirt and my breath rising quickly and silently, I let my head drop back. I had no idea how long we remained that way. Once more, the light altered. I hardly paid attention. The room felt too quiet for me to talk when I eventually stood up. I could still feel my heartbeat in my throat. Without saying anything, he held my hand firmly before releasing it just as gently. We didn't sit down. The pillows weren't straightened by us. For a while, we simply lived in silence. Later, while he packed his belongings, I watched from the window. Finally, the suitcase that had been left unattended all night was zipped up. He took his time. He didn't inquire about my well-being. He simply made his way to the door. Additionally, it sounded final when it closed behind him, as if it had been waiting all day. The house no longer felt like mine by the time he eventually left. However, I didn't either. I assured myself that it was harmless and merely a favor or act of compassion. However, it felt less like he was helping the longer he stayed. I had stopped pretending by the time he reached for me. I waited. Tell the truth. Would you have sent your partner's buddy home or allowed him to stay a bit longer if he had stayed the night and had given you the same look that he gave me? Tell me in the comments. I'm going to read. Please hit the bell, subscribe, and like the video if the narrative stuck with you. It keeps you here for the next one and helps more than you could imagine. See you in the following story.